When the U.S. invaded Iraq and overthrew and executed Saddam Hussein, North Korea said Saddam made one big mistake, and that was not having nuclear weapons. If they had nuclear weapons, the United States could never have invaded. And I'm
Hmm.
afraid that that's the message to the world right now that the U.S. is giving. Mohammed al-Baradei, when he was the head of the IAEA, said that 40 countries had the technological capability of developing nuclear weapons. 40 countries. It's a very, very fragile ceasefire. Uh, we don't even know the terms of it yet. There are so many ways this can break down. This Israeli government not only is an extreme right-wing government, but it's a harshly repressive and militaristic government. We need a regime change throughout the region. I'd like to see regime change in Iran by the Iranian people. I'd like to see regime change in Israel by the Israeli people. So Iran's position in the region was very, very badly weakened. And so Israel was triumphant in a certain sense, even before the attack on Iran. But from the global standpoint, this is a horrible defeat for the United Nations, for the International Atomic Energy Agency, for the Non-Proliferation Treaty, for the forces that wanted peace, forces that wanted diplomacy. The only stumbling block in these negotiations were the U.S. insistence that Iran give up entirely its right to enrichment, which Netanyahu and the Israelis had been pushing for a long time. But that was a way to not have a deal. That was a way to allow the US and Israel to bomb the crap out of Iran. But if I were the leaders in Iran, not with my mindset, but with their mindset, I would see that developing a bomb in secret would be the only guarantee of their survival. Project 2025, which is guiding the Trump administration, called for a dramatic increase in US nuclear weapons, and that's much more likely the direction the US is going. China, which relied on a very limited deterrent for decades, uh, now is rushing to increase their arsenal. This is madness on a global scale right now.
Hi, you're watching The Times of India, and I'm joined by Peter Kuznick. He's a professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. Thank you, Mr. Kuznick, for joining us. What is your assessment of what exactly is happening right now? The Iran Israel ceasefire announcement by President Trump is fragile at best. Do you think it will hold in the short run?
It's a very, very fragile ceasefire. We don't even know the terms of it yet. There are so many ways this can break down. I think it's more in Iran's interest at this point than it is in Israel's interest, the way they perceive it.
Okay.
Iran, Iran has very few cards to play. Not having control over their own air makes them completely vulnerable to attack by Israel. They have very little ability to resist Israel's attacks. So Israel has been acting with impunity. They've got a hit list of targets that they've almost entirely destroyed at this point. So they have not gone after the Ayatollah Khamenei or Foreign Minister Arakci, but they have gone after political leadership, scientific leadership, industrial facilities, nuclear facilities, military sites. I mean, so for Israel to stop now before they've completely eliminated Iran's nuclear program would be something that they would not want to do. For Iran, it's more in their interest because the longer this goes on, the more suffering is going to be inflicted, and the greater the chance that Israel will either assassinate Ayatollah Khamenei or attempt to create regime change. But Trump apparently put pressure on Netanyahu to stop. We see that there are few constraints upon Israel itself. Israel is feeling they're in position of complete dominance in the region now. And we look at what's going on in Gaza. There are no limits to Israeli cruelty or these crimes that Israel is willing to inflict upon
Mm.
the people in Gaza in order to achieve its goals. So, given that mindset, I don't see any reason why there would be constraints upon what Israel is willing to do in Iran either. So this Israeli government not only is an extreme right-wing government, but it's a harshly repressive and militaristic government. We need a regime change throughout the region. I'd like to see regime change in Iran by the Iranian people. I'd like to see regime change in Israel by the Israeli people. I mean, there are almost no good guys when we look at this situation. I would like to see regime change in the United States as well, because I think Trump is in many ways a proto fascist, and he's coming away as if he scored a big victory here. However, it's interesting. The early polling that's come out shows that the American people oppose the U.S. bombing of Iran by 11 points. So this is not a major victory. The Republicans are touting it as a major victory for Trump, but overall, the American people do not want to see the United States using the military means instead of diplomacy, as has been our habit for many years now.
Okay, beyond the politics, if everyone is claiming victory, who's the loser here?
The human race, the world, is the loser. Um, I mean, in the short run, Iran is clearly the loser. They control the state television, so they can say whatever they want. But there's nobody outside of Iran who thinks that Iran had a military victory or a
Mm.
political victory or a moral victory. Uh, Iran was helpless. And that's why they agreed for the ceasefire, because the damage that Israel was inflicting uh, was overwhelming, and the limits to what Israel could do were non-existent. So
Mm.
they didn't have the bunker buster bombs that were needed to totally destroy the facility at Fordo, but pretty much anything else they wanted to do, they could do. So this was a humiliating, overwhelming, extraordinary defeat for Iran. And it started before that when Iran's proxies were decimated by Israel. So Iran's position in the region was very, very badly weakened. And so Israel was triumphant in a certain sense, even before the attack on Iran. Uh, but from the global standpoint, this is a horrible defeat for the United Nations, for the International Atomic Energy Agency, for the Non-Proliferation Treaty, for the forces that wanted peace, forces that wanted diplomacy. You look at what this was. I mean, from Trump is now bragging, of course, the most beautiful, biggest, best ceasefire in history because of his own brilliance. But it's such a hollow claim. In 2015, Obama negotiated the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, based on which Iran gave up its nuclear weapons program, which the CIA says Iran had abandoned in 2003. But in exchange for sanctions relief, Iran allowed the most intrusive inspections ever, got mothballed most of its centrifuges, shipped most of its uranium out of the country, and was only enriching to 3.67%. The International Atomic Energy Agency conducted hundreds of inspections, including snap inspections, dozens, where they gave no forewarning and just went into these facilities and reported that Iran was abiding by the agreement. But Trump, for his own minuscule ego issues, blew it up in 2018 because he understood it was Obama's signature foreign policy achievement. So Trump pulled the United States out of the JCPOA. With all the experts said, Iran was at least a year away from developing the capability of having a bomb. 3.67 is very, very low, very far away. Then
Mm,
Trump blew that up. Iran expanded its program, rebuilt the centrifuges, better, more modern centrifuges, was spinning the uranium at up to 60%, which is much more than you need for nuclear energy. But they wanted it, again, apparently, as a bargaining chip, because the CIA says they never decided to reconstitute their nuclear weapons program. And they were still quite some time away, months to years, up to 2 years, according to the CIA, before they could actually develop a deliverable bomb. But Trump didn't care. So Trump comes into office a second time, and he says now he wants to negotiate a new treaty, a better treaty than Obama's agreement. And so, uh, but the better to him means that Iran would have no right to enrich uranium. Now, that was something that Iran could never accept. As a signatory to the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, Iran had the absolute right to enrich uranium for its own domestic purposes, not for weapons, but for energy and research. And it was insisting on doing so. Trump knew that by saying that Iran would have zero right to enrich uranium, he was putting forth an agreement that Iran could never accept. And so
mm.
the United States was never an honest arbiter or negotiator in these agreements. Iran was willing to, almost desperate to give up its nuclear program again, to ship the 60% enriched uranium out of Iran, to allow inspections, to limit the enrichment to 3.67% again. And it would
This is when did Iran
that was
say
their
yes?
position in the negotiations.
Okay,
The
during the
the,
negotiations.
the only stumbling block in this negotiations were the U.S. insistence that Iran give up entirely its right to enrichment, which Netanyahu and the Israelis had been pushing for a long time. But that was a way to not have a deal. That was a way to allow the U.S. and Israel to bomb the crap out of Iran. And so not only that, but then there was this new strategy of sucker punching Iran. So the Iranians were caught with their guard down because there was supposed to be another round of negotiations for the U.S. 2 days later. And that's when Israel decided to attack. And it was a surprise attack.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you believe now Trump says that he has obliterated Iran's nuclear program? Do you think that we should be just as quick to pop the bubbly? Because the noises that we hear, both from inside Iran and from the analyst circle, they're saying that 60% enriched uranium might still be inside Iran, and in Iran would possibly after this bombing and this situation make its dash to the bomb even faster.
Yeah, that's one of the scariest scenarios. Um, the Trump said, they totally destroyed it. Most best bombing attack in history. Nobody else could do it but the United States, and no other president would have the courage to do it except him. He said. But then all the other American authorities, the military authorities, and the experts dialed down Trump's inflated rhetoric and said that it would cause significant damage to Iran's stockpiles. The IAEA, which again said that they had no evidence that Iran was dashing for a bomb like the Israelis and Trump claimed, the IAEA said that they had reason to believe that Iran had removed the highly enriched uranium and some of the centrifuges before the uh, Israeli and U.S. bombing occurred. So we don't know what happened to that. Nobody knows outside of Iran where that enriched uranium is right now, how much
Netanyahu claims to know, however, he said in an interview a few days ago that
who
he
claimed,
knows where that enriched uranium is.
who said that?
Netanyahu.
Yeah, Netanyahu said that. But you can't believe him any more than you can believe Trump. Um, so the American authorities claim they have no idea, and you know there aren't that many places, but Iran supposedly has secret sites, and so now the question about whether Iran will now be more desperate to try for a bomb, we don't know. Iran's capabilities have been severely weakened, uh, and back in 2002, in the State of the Union address, George W. Bush talked about the axis of evil:
Hmm.
Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. Well, the difference among those three was that North Korea has nuclear weapons. And when the US invaded Iraq and overthrew and executed Saddam Hussein, North Korea said Saddam made one big mistake, and that was not having nuclear weapons. If they had nuclear weapons, the United States could never have invaded. And I'm
Hmm.
afraid that that's the message to the world right now that the US is giving. Mohammed al-Baradei, when he was the head of the IAEA, said that 40 countries had the technological capability of developing nuclear weapons. 40 countries. And the message that the world is getting is that the only security you have from being attacked and overrun and destroyed as a country is having a nuclear bomb. I hope that they don't, that's not the message that people are receiving. I think 9 nuclear powers is dangerous enough. It would be horrifying if Iran did develop a nuclear bomb, not only for the sake of Israel, but because Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Turkey would all rush to develop bombs, and they all have the technological capability of doing so. But we could see this globally. 73% of the South Korean population says they want South Korea to have nuclear bombs.
Right.
Ishiba in Japan, before he took over, said he not only wants an Asian NATO, he thinks Japan should have nuclear bombs.
Hmm.
Zelensky wants Ukraine to have nuclear bombs. The Poles say that they should have access. This is crazy. As a species, as a planet, we're going the wrong direction. The nuclear powers now are not only uh, modernizing their arsenals to make it more efficient and more lethal, they're all expanding their nuclear arsenals again. This is the wrong way. We lowered it from 70,000 nuclear weapons in 1986 down to under 14,000 until this year. And now everybody's rebuilding it and expanding their nuclear arsenals again. This is madness. But if I were the leaders in Iran, not with my mindset, but with their mindset, I would see that developing a bomb in secret would be the only guarantee of their survival. Um, it would be a disaster from the standpoint of the species and the planet, but from a local parochial point of view, I don't like the leaders in Iran. I despise them. They represent the opposite of everything I think is good. They're so repressive, so theocratic. It's not only to women, but to any dissenters. But if there were regime change imposed from the United States and Israel, then likely people who took over would be even more extreme, more hardline, whether they come from the theocracy or the Revolutionary Guard. Iran is a thriving society with a lot of educated, progressive people who want to see change. If it was internal regime change, it might have some possibility. But we've never seen a regime change that succeeded based upon bombing. Even Saddam Hussein didn't get overthrown by the bombing; he got overthrown by the
Right.
boots on the ground. And they were able to catch him and kill him. So there's not a lot of good alternatives, except if we have some kind of global security agreement, new architecture that takes into account everybody's interests.
What does it mean for the current NPT, proliferation architecture that exists in the world? Do you think that's history now?
Well, Iran was about to leave the NPT.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, I think, five countries that aren't part of the NPT: India, Pakistan, North Korea, uh, Israel, and Sudan or South Sudan. But four of them are nuclear powers, and so it doesn't. And it also, if you look at the original NPT agreement, Article 2 called for the existing nuclear powers to all give up their nuclear weapons.
Hmm.
Doing that now, I mean, they did cut them, but during Trump's first term, for example, uh, he was told that the United States had dramatically reduced its nuclear arsenal. And his response was, well, we should increase our nuclear arsenal tenfold. That's when Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, called him a fucking moron, and, you know, but this is the mindset that Project 2025, which is guiding the Trump administration, called for a dramatic increase in U.S. nuclear weapons. And that's much more likely the direction the U.S. is going. China, which relied on a very limited deterrent for decades, now is rushing to increase their arsenal. They had for a long time 200 nuclear weapons. Now they're up to 500 or 600. The Pentagon is saying that they want 1,000 by 2030 and 1,500 by 2035. This is madness on a global scale right now. India and Pakistan have been at war several times. Both are nuclear armed. And, this is just too dangerous. We have to find other ways to settle differences, resolve crises rather than military. And so, even though what Trump did there's a slight chance it's going to lead to a ceasefire. Uh, but that's not the right way to go about it. I'm so glad to see that early polling in the U.S. that he didn't get a bump from this. He didn't get what Maggie Thatcher had in his war with Argentina. That's the idea
Given, given
that
the fact
that
that his support base, he's largely, during his campaign, he was all about peace, 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 and to end the wars. And here's the beginning of another one. So it's quite counterintuitive, don't you think?
absolutely. I never believed a word of that. Trump said he wanted the Nobel Peace Prize. Well, I you know,
Pakistan has nominated him for a Nobel Peace
yeah,
Prize last
Pakistan
year.
nominated him. What idiots! Um, I nominated the current winners. I was in Oslo. I've been nominating Nihon and Dankyo for many years, uh, and this year they won. So they invited me to Oslo to be part of their delegation, which was wonderful because they deserved it. Um, Trump deserves it in the same way that Henry Kissinger deserved it. What was it, 1973 or 74, when he won it after bombing, Vietnam for years, millions of deaths he caused in Vietnam. The number now, I was just in Hanoi a year ago, January, and I had always said, Robert McNamara came into my class some years ago, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, the architect of that war. He would tell my students that he believed that 3.8 million Vietnamese died in the war. When I was in Hanoi, the figure they now use is 5 million Vietnamese died in the war. And Henry
Mhm.
Kissinger won the Nobel Peace Prize.
You
So
know,
that's the same sense that Trump deserves.
it is a scary scenario because the Iranian government, just today, an advisor to the Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei, he said that his country still had stocks of enriched uranium, which you and I both know they have, and that the game is not over. He said that, they had taken necessary measures to ensure the continuation of the of their nuclear program after US and Israeli strikes targeted their facilities. So the game is really not over.
And to the extent that that exists, that gives Israel the quote unquote excuse, the pretext for continuing hostilities toward Iran, for periodically bombing. I mean, Israel, the one thing they do have, they're very low on morality at this point, but they are very good on espionage and intelligence. The
Hmm.
Mossad is very, very effective. And they've got a lot of sources inside Iran, even though many have been executed recently, but they have great intelligence, and they'll get intelligence on if Iran really does try to reconstitute its a nuclear weapons program, which it hasn't had since 2003, and they'll continue bombing. So that would not be a good formula for Iran to maintain its sovereignty and its existence. So I don't want to see them dash for a bomb and a secret bomb, but I could understand why, from parochial Iranian perspective, you could make that argument.
All right, and not just Iran's dash for the bomb, probably the entire Middle East. It'll start an arms race in the entire Middle East, and of course, then the entire world, and who knows where it's going to stop. But thank you for those insights, Peter, and for joining us in this, interview.
Can I say one more thing that struck me? Uh, did you see that comment by Medvedev the other day, where
Yes,
he's
I yes, I did.
a
He
number
the
of
nuclear.
countries are ready to directly supply Iran with their own nuclear warheads? That's insanity. I mean, I'm glad Medvedev, he's a very extreme. I don't know if anybody takes him seriously. Lavrov actually says something much better. He says if every country interprets the right to self defense set by the UN Charter as I decide for myself when to use this right, and I don't want to look back at the Charter, there will obviously be no world order but complete chaos, Lavrov said, which seems to me a pretty strong indictment of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Also, I mean, I say Russia was heavily provoked into doing so, but still should never have invaded. And so all of these situations, we need diplomacy. We need to step back. We need Tulsi Gabbard, who said that Iran was not working toward a bomb, issued a statement within the last 2 weeks, a 3.5 minute video saying the world is closer to nuclear war than it's ever been. And she released this from Hiroshima, which she was visiting. And she said, not only if there's a nuclear war, it could end life on the planet. And she talked about nuclear winter. And we've, since the end of the Cold War, the awareness of the nuclear threat has really gone down. We need to raise that awareness and make sure that the world's going the opposite direction again, which right now, as Modi said several times, this is not a time of war. This is not an era for war. He means that this should not be a time of war. But in reality, sadly, it seems to be a time of war.
Sadly, and let's hope on that. Let's end on that note. It is not an era of war, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi has repeatedly said, and it just seems that the world right now is in no mood for listening.
No, we have to
Yeah.
make it listen.
Thank you so much for joining us and for those
Thank you for
insights.
having me.
Thank you.